You're inviting me to dinner so everyone can see how far I've fallen. But you still have no idea who owns the company you're sitting in." Victoria Hayes looked across the table, calm and composed, while Daniel Whitaker's smile slowly disappeared. For 2 years, Daniel believed he had written the final chapter of their marriage. He believed Victoria was the woman he left behind, the woman who had nothing left after walking away from his world. But that night, at the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan, he was about to discover the biggest mistake of his life. Daniel had not invited his ex-wife to dinner because he missed her. He had invited her because he wanted a front-row seat to her humiliation. The private dining room at the Sterling Room was filled with everything Daniel loved: crystal glasses, city lights reflecting through floor-to-ceiling windows, and powerful people who wanted to be seen beside him. Investors, executives, and friends from his elite circle filled the room. At the center of it all was Daniel, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, smiling like a man who believed he had already won. Beside him sat Lauren Mitchell, his new fiancée, a woman who seemed to enjoy every second of the attention surrounding them. "I still can't believe she actually came," Lauren whispered with a small laugh. Daniel glanced toward the entrance. Victoria always had trouble accepting reality. Those words carried farther than he realized. A few guests smiled politely. Others looked away. Everyone understood the message. This dinner was not about closure. It was a performance. Daniel wanted everyone to see the difference between the successful CEO he had become and the woman he believed had lost everything. Then the doors opened. Victoria Hayes stepped inside. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to impress anyone. She simply walked in wearing a simple black dress, her posture straight, her expression peaceful. She wasn't trying to prove she belonged there. She already knew she did. The room became quieter. Daniel studied her carefully, looking for the nervous woman he remembered from the final months of their marriage. But that woman was gone. "Victoria," Daniel said, standing halfway before sitting back down. "I wasn't sure you'd show up." She smiled slightly. "I wasn't sure you'd remember how to have a conversation without an audience." A few people exchanged surprised looks. Daniel laughed, but it sounded forced. "Still sharp, I see. Still underestimating people, I see," Victoria replied. For a moment, Daniel had no answer. Because that was always what bothered him about Victoria. She never fought the way he expected. She never begged. She never tried to convince people to see her value. During their marriage, Victoria had been the person behind the scenes. She helped him prepare presentations, reviewed business plans, and stood beside him when his company was struggling. But when Daniel finally reached the top, he started believing he climbed there alone. He forgot the late nights she spent supporting him. He forgot the sacrifices she made. He forgot that success built without gratitude eventually becomes empty. "I wanted this dinner to be honest," Daniel said, lifting his glass. "I think we both know things didn't work out because we wanted different lives." Victoria looked at him quietly. She remembered those words. Not the exact sentence, but the feeling behind them. Daniel had a way of making every decision sound reasonable, even when it hurt someone else. "Different lives?" she asked softly. "Is that what you call it?" Daniel leaned back. "What would you call it?" Victoria looked around the room at the people waiting for her to react. Then she looked back at the man who once promised they would build a future together. "I would call it the moment you decided my value depended on whether you could see it." The table went silent. Daniel smiled, but his confidence had a crack in it now. He thought this dinner was the beginning of Victoria realizing what she had lost. He had no idea it was the beginning of him discovering what he never truly owned. And before the night was over, everyone in that room would learn the same thing Daniel was about to learn. Victoria Hayes had never been powerless. She had only been quiet. And Daniel Whitaker had made the first mistake of confusing silence with weakness. "Do you really think I came here because I needed your approval?" Victoria asked quietly. "I came because I wanted to see if the man I once loved was still hiding behind the same excuses." The words stayed in the air longer than anyone expected. Daniel Whitaker had invited Victoria to that dinner expecting embarrassment, maybe anger, maybe tears. What he did not expect was her calmness. That was what bothered him the most. Victoria was not trying to win the room. She was not trying to defend herself. She was simply sitting there, watching him reveal exactly who he had become. 2 years earlier, Victoria and Daniel had been a different kind of couple. Before the expensive suits, before the headlines, before Daniel became known as one of the most successful CEOs in the financial world, there was just a man with a dream, and a woman who believed in him. Victoria remembered the small apartment they shared when Daniel was still building his company. The nights when they ate simple dinners because every extra dollar went back into his business. She remembered sitting beside him at the kitchen table, reviewing plans and listening to his worries. One day, "I am going to build something people cannot ignore," Daniel had told her. Victoria had smiled and answered, "Then we will build it together." At the time, she believed those words meant something. But success has a way of changing people. Slowly, Daniel started spending more time with executives and investors. Conversations that once happened between them started happening behind closed doors. Decisions she used to help make were suddenly made without her. Then came the moment she realized she was no longer his partner. She was just someone standing in his way. "You have changed," Victoria told him one night during their final months together. Daniel had looked exhausted, frustrated, and more focused on winning than understanding. "No, Victoria. I have grown," he replied. "And sometimes growing means leaving behind things that no longer fit." Those words stayed with her. Because Daniel did not say he had fallen out of love. He said she no longer fit into the life he wanted. Back at the restaurant, Daniel leaned forward, trying to regain control of the conversation. "You always had a way of making things more complicated than they needed to be." Victoria looked at him. "No, Daniel. I just stopped pretending your choices did not hurt me." Lauren glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable that the conversation was not going the way Daniel planned. "Victoria, I think Daniel has moved on. Maybe this dinner should be about accepting that." Victoria turned toward her. She did not look angry. She almost looked sorry. "You are right about one thing. He has moved on." She paused. But moving on and becoming a better person are not the same thing. The people around the table became quiet again. Daniel tightened his grip on his glass. He hated that she still had the ability to make him question himself without raising her voice. "You came here just to judge me?" he asked. Victoria shook her head. "No. I came here because I wanted to understand something." "What?" Daniel asked. Victoria looked directly into his eyes. How someone can forget the person who stood beside them before everyone else started applauding. For the first time that evening, Daniel had no immediate response. Because deep down, he knew there was truth in what she said. But admitting it would mean accepting that his success was not built by him alone. The dinner continued, but the balance had changed. Daniel still had the room, the money, and the reputation. But Victoria had something he could not control. She had peace. And while everyone watched Daniel try to prove he was still the person in charge, a message quietly appeared on Victoria's phone. It was from Jonathan Pierce. The message was short. "The board meeting is confirmed. They are ready when you are." Victoria looked at the screen for a moment, then placed the phone face down. Daniel noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked. Victoria smiled gently. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be." Daniel thought she was talking about the dinner. He did not realize she was talking about the future. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be." Victoria's words sounded simple, but Daniel Whitaker could not shake the feeling that there was something behind them. For the first time that evening, he wondered if he had walked into a situation he did not fully understand. But pride has a way of convincing people they are still in control, even when the ground beneath them has already started shifting. After dinner ended, Daniel stood near the entrance of the Sterling Room, shaking hands with investors and accepting compliments about his company's future. To everyone watching, he looked like a man who had everything figured out. The successful CEO, the respected businessman, the person everyone wanted to know. But behind that image was a truth Daniel never wanted to face. A large part of his success had been built with Victoria standing quietly beside him. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the headquarters of Whitaker Financial Solutions, expecting a normal day. The building was exactly how he liked it. Glass walls, private offices, employees moving quickly through the halls. A place that represented everything he had worked for. He walked into his office and placed his coffee on the desk. "Good morning," his assistant, Rachel, said as she followed him inside. "Your 9 o'clock meeting was moved to 10. The board requested an emergency session at noon." Daniel barely looked up. "Emergency session? About what?" Rachel hesitated. "They did not give details." Daniel frowned. "They should have asked me before scheduling anything." That sentence represented Daniel perfectly. He was used to being the person people came to for answers. He was used to making decisions and watching others follow them. What he did not realize was that some decisions were now being made without him. Across town, Victoria sat inside a quiet office overlooking the city. Unlike Daniel's office, there was no need for her to prove anything. No awards on the walls. No photos designed to impress visitors. Just a desk, a few documents, and a woman who had spent years staying out of the spotlight. Jonathan Pierce placed a folder in front of her. "The board members are ready," he said. Victoria looked at the folder but did not open it immediately. "Are you sure this is the right time?" Jonathan studied her carefully. "Victoria, you have been patient for 2 years. You gave him every opportunity to understand what he lost." She looked out the window. "I never wanted to embarrass him." Jonathan nodded. "I know. I just wanted him to realize that the person he dismissed was never insignificant." Meanwhile, Daniel entered the boardroom expecting another discussion about growth plans and investors. Instead, he noticed something unusual. Several board members were already seated. No one was making small talk. No one was checking their phones. The atmosphere felt different. "What is going on?" Daniel asked. One of the executives looked toward the door. "We are waiting for one more person." Daniel sat down, confused. "Who?" Before anyone answered, the door opened. Victoria Hayes walked in. Daniel stared at her, surprised but not worried. "Victoria? What are you doing here?" She calmly took a seat at the opposite end of the table. "I believe we are here to discuss the future of this company." Daniel gave a small laugh. "You do not work here." Victoria looked at him. "That depends on what you mean by work." A few board members exchanged glances. Daniel noticed. Something was wrong. Something he could not explain. Then the chairman of the board placed a document on the table. "Before we begin, there is something everyone needs to understand." He opened the folder. "Victoria Hayes is the controlling owner of Aurelia Capital Group." Silence filled the room. Daniel looked from the document to Victoria. "That is not possible." Victoria did not react. She simply watched him process the information he had never considered. The woman he invited to dinner to remind everyone of her past was now sitting in the room that would decide his future. And Daniel was about to learn the one thing he had never understood. The person he underestimated the most was the person with the most power. Victoria Hayes is the controlling owner of Aurelia Capital Group. The words landed in the boardroom like a truth nobody was prepared to hear. Daniel Whitaker stared at the document in front of him, waiting for someone to laugh, waiting for someone to say this was some kind of misunderstanding. But nobody did. The executives around the table remained silent. They were not confused. They were aware of something Daniel had never known. "This is impossible," Daniel finally said. His voice was quieter than before. Victoria looked at him from across the table. She did not look angry. She did not look proud. She looked like someone who had spent a long time carrying a truth that nobody else was ready to accept. "Why is it impossible, Daniel?" she asked. "Because you never knew?" Daniel leaned forward. "You expect me to believe that you have been sitting on a company worth billions while I have been running this business?" Victoria paused for a moment. "No. I expect you to understand that you were never running everything you thought you were." That sentence changed the room. For years, Daniel had built his identity around one belief. He was the man who created something from nothing. He was the person who made the impossible happen. But now, sitting in that boardroom, he was forced to question the story he had been telling himself for years. Jonathan Pierce placed another document on the table. "The ownership structure has been verified. Aurelia Capital Group has maintained a controlling interest through multiple investment agreements." Daniel looked through the papers quickly. His confidence started fading with every page. "Why did you hide this?" he asked Victoria. It was not anger anymore. It was confusion. Victoria looked down briefly, remembering all the years she stayed quiet. "Because I wanted one person in my life to love me without knowing what I had." The room became still. "When we met, I did not tell you about my family or my position because I wanted to know if you cared about Victoria Hayes, not the person behind the name." Daniel looked away. That answer hurt more than he expected, because somewhere deep inside, he knew exactly what she meant. He remembered the early days. Before investors. Before success. Before he started measuring people by what they could add to his image. "You should have told me," Daniel said. Victoria nodded slowly. "Maybe I should have." She looked directly at him. "But if I had, I would have spent the rest of our marriage wondering whether you loved me or the access that came with me." Daniel had no response, because that question was one he never wanted to answer. The board continued discussing the future of the company. New leadership plans, financial direction, long-term strategy. Daniel sat there listening, but for the first time in years, He was not the person controlling the conversation. Outside the room, employees continued working, unaware that the foundation of their company had just shifted. Inside, Daniel watched Victoria handle every question with confidence and clarity. She was not the woman he remembered leaving behind. She was the woman he never truly took the time to know. When the meeting ended, Daniel followed her into the hallway. Victoria, wait. She stopped, but did not turn around immediately. What? He asked carefully. What happens now? Victoria looked at him. Now we stop pretending. Daniel swallowed. Are you trying to destroy me? For the first time, Victoria looked genuinely disappointed. No, Daniel. That is the difference between us. You think power exists to make someone smaller. I think power exists to make things right. Daniel stood there silently as she walked away. But he still had one question burning in his mind. If Victoria had the power all along, why did she wait until now? And the answer was about to reveal the one part of the story Daniel never knew. You think I waited 2 years just to take everything from you? Victoria asked. No, Daniel. I waited because I needed to know if you would ever understand what you had before I showed you what you lost. Daniel stood in the quiet hallway outside the boardroom, watching the woman he once believed he understood. But for the first time, he realized he had only known the version of Victoria that existed beside him. He had never taken the time to see the woman she was when she was standing on her own. The news about Aurelia Capital Group spread quickly inside the company. Executives who once saw Daniel as the unstoppable leader were suddenly asking questions. Not because they wanted to embarrass him, but because they needed answers. The company had entered a new chapter, and nobody knew what that meant for Daniel's position. Back in his office, Daniel sat behind his desk staring at the city outside his window. The same view that once made him feel successful now felt different. For the first time, the glass walls around him did not feel like protection. They felt like a reminder that he might have been living inside an illusion. His assistant Rachel entered quietly. Daniel, there is something else you should know. He looked up. What? She placed a folder on the desk. Several board members have questions about decisions made over the last 18 months. Daniel opened the folder. Inside were reports, financial reviews, and strategic decisions he had approved. He quickly scanned the pages. They are reviewing my leadership? Rachel hesitated. They are reviewing the company's direction. Daniel leaned back. Same thing. But even as he said it, he knew there was a difference. For years, he had believed the company and his personal success were the same thing. Now he was being forced to separate the two. Across town, Victoria sat with Jonathan Pierce in a private office. The city moved below them, busy and unaware of the changes happening behind closed doors. Jonathan looked at her carefully. You know he will probably see this as a betrayal. Victoria sighed. I know. And you are prepared for that. She looked down at the documents in front of her. I am prepared for him to finally see the truth. Jonathan nodded. You could have exposed everything years ago. Victoria gave a small smile. That was never the point. She remembered the final months of her marriage. The way Daniel slowly stopped asking about her day. The way conversations became business meetings. The way he started introducing her as if she was part of an old chapter instead of the person who stood beside him through the difficult ones. I did not want revenge, Victoria said. I wanted respect. That evening, Daniel returned home to an apartment that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The expensive furniture, the awards, the photographs on the walls. Everything represented a life he thought he had built alone. Then he noticed something on his desk. An old photograph. He and Victoria years earlier, before the success, before the distance. He picked it up and stared at their younger faces. He remembered that version of himself. The man who was grateful. The man who listened. The man who believed love mattered more than status. His phone rang. It was Lauren. Daniel, we need to talk, she said quickly. Everyone is asking questions. What is happening with the company? Daniel closed his eyes. Even now, the first concern was not how he felt. It was what was happening to his image. I will handle it, he replied. But when the call ended, he remained sitting there in silence. Because for the first time, he was not sure he could handle it. The next morning, Victoria arrived at Aurelia Capital Group headquarters for her first official leadership meeting. Employees watched as she walked through the building. Some recognized her from years ago. Others only knew the rumors. But everyone was about to learn something Daniel had forgotten. Victoria Hayes was not stepping into power because she wanted to defeat him. She was stepping into power because she had finally stopped allowing someone else to define her value. And when the company's future was placed on the table, Daniel would discover that losing control was only the beginning of what he had to face. You built this company with confidence, Daniel. But confidence without humility has a way of becoming blindness. Victoria's words stayed with him long after their conversation ended. Daniel Whitaker had spent years believing losing control was something that happened to other people. Not to him. Not to the man who turned a small investment firm into a global financial powerhouse. But now, for the first time, Daniel was facing a reality he could not negotiate away. He was no longer the only person making decisions. The morning after Victoria's first official leadership meeting, the atmosphere inside the company felt different. Employees moved through the halls with curiosity. Executives spoke more carefully. Everyone knew something important had changed, even if they did not know the full story. Daniel walked into the conference room expecting resistance. Instead, he found something worse. Questions. The last 2 years of expansion were aggressive, one board member said. The results looked impressive, but some decisions created unnecessary risks. Daniel leaned forward. Those decisions created growth. Victoria, sitting across the table, calmly reviewed the reports. They created short-term growth, she replied. But long-term stability requires something different. Daniel looked at her. You are saying I was wrong? Victoria held his gaze. I am saying success is not just about how fast you climb. It is about whether the foundation can support you when things change. The room became quiet. Years ago, Daniel would have dismissed that advice. He would have called it cautious thinking. But now he was hearing it from the one person who had understood his vision before anyone else. After the meeting, Daniel followed Victoria into the hallway. You knew about these problems? He asked. Victoria stopped walking. I knew there were warning signs. And you said nothing? Daniel's voice carried frustration. Victoria turned around. I tried. That answer surprised him. When? She looked at him. The night you told me I was holding you back. Daniel froze. Because he remembered that night. He remembered being frustrated. He remembered believing Victoria did not understand ambition. But he did not remember listening. You were not trying to stop me, Victoria continued. You were trying to tell me that I was losing myself. Daniel looked away. For once, he had no argument. Later that afternoon, Daniel received another unexpected message. This time, it was from one of the company's largest partners. They requested a private meeting with Victoria. Daniel noticed the request and immediately felt something was wrong. Why are they contacting her directly? He asked Rachel. His assistant looked uncomfortable. Because they have always had a relationship with Aurelia Capital Group. Daniel looked up. What does that mean? Rachel paused. It means some of the biggest investors were never connected to you personally. They were connected to the ownership behind the company. The answer hit harder than he expected. Daniel had spent years believing people followed him because of his talent. But now he was forced to consider another possibility. Some people respected the company, not just the man standing at the front of it. That evening, Lauren arrived at Daniel's apartment. But the confidence she carried before was gone. Daniel, people are talking, she said. They are saying you might not be leading the company anymore. Daniel looked at her. Is that what you are worried about? Lauren hesitated. She did not answer. And that silence told him more than words could. For the first time, Daniel understood something painful. Some people had been standing beside him because of what he represented, not because of who he was. Meanwhile, Victoria prepared for the next major company announcement. Jonathan placed the final documents on her desk. Tomorrow changes everything, he said. Victoria looked at the papers quietly. No, she replied. Tomorrow simply reveals what was already true. The next day, the entire company would learn who truly controlled the future of Aurelia Capital Group. And Daniel would face the moment he had been avoiding since the beginning. The world was finally going to see the difference between a man who owned a title and a woman who carried real power. For years, everyone thought Daniel Whitaker built an empire. Today, they will finally learn who was holding the foundation together. The words came from the stage inside Aurelia Capital Group's main conference hall, but Daniel felt like they were directed straight at him. Hundreds of employees, executives, and investors filled the room. Cameras were prepared. The company's future was about to be announced. And for the first time in his career, Daniel was not standing at the center of the spotlight. Victoria Hayes walked onto the stage with quiet confidence. No dramatic entrance. No need to prove herself. She did not need attention because she already had something more powerful. Respect. The room became silent as the chairman introduced her. Today, we recognize the person who has guided the foundation of this organization for years. The controlling owner of Aurelia Capital Group, Victoria Hayes. Applause filled the room. Daniel stood among the executives. Watching the same people who once celebrated his leadership now recognized the woman he had underestimated. He looked around, searching for someone who seemed surprised. But nobody was. Everyone knew except him. Victoria stepped forward. "I want everyone here to understand one thing," she said. "This company was never built by one person. It was built by thousands of people who believed in something bigger than themselves." Her words were different from what Daniel expected. He expected revenge. He expected humiliation. Instead, she was talking about the employees, the teams, and the future. She was not trying to make him look small. She was simply showing everyone what real leadership looked like. After the announcement, Daniel walked through the crowd quietly. People who once came to him for every decision now approached Victoria with questions and ideas. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. Being present, but no longer being the most important person in the room. Later that afternoon, Daniel found Victoria in her office reviewing company reports. "You planned this," he said. Victoria looked up. "Plan what?" "All of it. The announcement. The board meeting. Making me look like I never mattered." Victoria closed the folder in front of her. "Daniel, that is the difference between us. You think everything is about winning or losing. And you do not?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I think it is about the truth." Daniel looked away. That answer frustrated him because he could not argue against it. For years, he had focused on proving he was successful, but he never stopped to ask whether he was becoming someone worth respecting. Before he could respond, Jonathan Pierce entered the office holding another folder. His expression was serious. "Victoria, we have a situation." She immediately noticed the change in his tone. "What happened?" Jonathan placed the folder on the desk. A major investor review was requested. They discovered irregularities in several past agreements signed under Daniel's leadership. Daniel looked at him sharply. "Are you saying I did something wrong?" Jonathan answered carefully. "I am saying questions have been raised. The board will need answers." Daniel felt the room getting smaller. Until that moment, he thought losing his title was the hardest thing he would face. But now he realized there was something more difficult, facing the consequences of decisions he had never questioned. Victoria looked at Daniel. For a moment, he expected anger. Instead, he saw disappointment. "I never wanted this to happen," she said softly. "But I cannot protect someone from the results of their own choices." Those words stayed with him. Because deep down, Daniel knew she was right. That evening, news about the company review began spreading. Investors wanted clarity. Employees wanted stability. And Daniel's carefully built image started to change. Meanwhile, Victoria received one final message from Jonathan. "There is one more person who wants to meet with you. Someone who knows what happened before you left the company." Victoria read the message twice. She knew the next conversation could reveal the one truth even Daniel had forgotten. And when that truth came out, it would change not only how people saw Daniel, but how Daniel saw himself. The person who knows the truth about Daniel is not someone from his company. It is someone who watched him walk away from everything he once promised to protect. Jonathan Pierce's words made Victoria pause. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Uncertainty. She had spent 2 years preparing for this moment. She expected Daniel to be angry. She expected him to blame her. But she did not expect new information to appear that could change how she understood the final months of their marriage. The next morning, Victoria met Jonathan at a quiet private office downtown. A folder sat on the table between them. "Who is this person?" Victoria asked. Jonathan looked serious. "Someone who worked closely with Daniel before the divorce. Someone who saw decisions being made that even you did not know about." Victoria opened the folder. Inside were internal reports, meeting notes, and records from the early days of Daniel's rise as CEO. She read silently for several minutes. Then she stopped. "He knew?" she asked. Jonathan nodded. "Not everything, but enough." The documents showed that during the months before their divorce, Daniel had been warned about several financial risks. People inside the company had raised concerns. Some decisions were rushed. Some partnerships were pushed forward too quickly. And instead of slowing down, Daniel continued because he wanted to prove he was unstoppable. Victoria looked down at the papers. She remembered those years. She remembered telling Daniel to be careful. She remembered asking him if success was becoming more important than the people around him. But he never listened. He thought she was afraid of change. He thought she did not understand ambition. The truth was different. She understood ambition. She just understood the cost of losing yourself along the way. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his office reviewing the same reports. For the first time, he was not looking for someone to blame. He was looking for answers. Rachel placed a cup of coffee on his desk. "Daniel, there is something I think you should know." He looked up. "What?" She hesitated. "Victoria did not use her position to remove you." Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" Rachel explained that when the board discussed leadership changes, Victoria was the only person who argued for giving Daniel time to respond. "She defended you?" Daniel asked, almost surprised by the idea. Rachel nodded. "She said your mistakes should be reviewed fairly, not punished because people wanted a dramatic ending." Daniel looked away. That was the moment something inside him shifted. He had spent days believing Victoria came back to destroy him. But maybe she came back because she was tired of carrying the truth alone. Later that evening, Daniel asked Victoria to meet. Not at a luxury restaurant. Not in a place designed to impress anyone. Just a quiet coffee shop where nobody knew them. When she arrived, Daniel stood up. For once, there was no confidence performance. No perfect CEO image. "I owe you an apology," he said. Victoria sat down, but remained quiet. Daniel continued. "I spent years thinking you left because you could not handle my success. I never considered that maybe I was the reason we lost everything." Victoria looked at him carefully. "Do you know what hurt the most, Daniel?" He waited. "It was not the divorce. It was realizing you did not even notice when I stopped being part of your life." Daniel lowered his eyes. Those words were harder to hear than any business criticism. Because they were true. Before he could respond, his phone started ringing. It was an urgent call from the board. Daniel answered. His expression changed immediately. "What happened?" Victoria asked. Daniel looked at her. "The final review is tomorrow morning." He paused. "They are deciding whether I stay with the company at all." Victoria watched him silently. The man who once believed nothing could take his power away was now facing the consequences of his choices. But before she could say anything, Daniel received one more message. A name appeared on the screen. Someone who had been silent for years. Someone connected to the beginning of everything. Daniel looked at Victoria, his face filled with confusion. "Your father's former advisor wants to speak with us." Victoria froze. Because she knew that conversation could reveal the one secret that started this entire chain of events. And tomorrow, Daniel would finally learn why Victoria had hidden her true identity for so long. "I spent years trying to prove I was powerful," Daniel Whitaker said quietly. "But the person who truly believed in me was the one person I stopped seeing." For the first time in a long time, Daniel was not speaking like a CEO. He was speaking like a man who finally understood what he had lost. The next morning, Daniel and Victoria sat across from Jonathan Pierce and a former advisor from Aurelia Capital Group. The room was quiet as the advisor placed an old file on the table. "There is something you both need to understand," he said. Victoria did not hide her identity because she wanted control. She hid it because she wanted something money could never buy. Daniel looked confused. "What?" The advisor looked at him. "A relationship where she was valued for who she was, not what she owned." The words were difficult for Daniel to hear because they revealed the truth he had avoided. Victoria never wanted to test him. She wanted to trust him. She wanted the same simple thing every person wants when they love someone: to know they are enough. The advisor explained that Victoria had always had the ability to take control of Aurelia Capital Group. She could have revealed everything years earlier. She could have changed Daniel's career overnight. But she chose not to because she believed the man she married was still somewhere beneath the ambition. Daniel lowered his head. He remembered every moment he ignored her advice. Every time he walked away from a conversation because he thought business mattered more. Every time he assumed she would always be there. "I thought I was building a future," Daniel said. Victoria looked at him. "You were, but you forgot who you were building it with." Those words stayed with him. Later that day, the board meeting began. Everyone expected a dramatic decision. They expected Daniel to be removed immediately. But Victoria surprised everyone. She stood before the board and spoke calmly. "Daniel made mistakes. Serious ones. But this company was never built by destroying people. It was built by recognizing potential and demanding accountability." The board listened carefully. Victoria recommended a new leadership structure. Daniel would no longer have complete control, but he would have a chance to rebuild trust through his actions. It was not forgiveness without consequences. It was a second chance with responsibility attached. Months passed. Aurelia Capital Group entered a new era. Victoria continued leading the company with patience and vision. She focused on growth, innovation, and creating opportunities for people who had been overlooked. Daniel changed too. For the first time in years, he listened more than he spoke. He learned that leadership was not about always being the smartest person in the room. It was about understanding the people who helped you get there. One evening, Daniel and Victoria met one last time. Not as husband and wife. Not as enemies. Just as two people who shared a chapter of their lives. "I am proud of you," Daniel said. Victoria smiled softly. "I hope one day you are proud of yourself too." He looked at her and nodded. "I should have seen you sooner." Victoria replied, "Maybe. But I see myself now. And that matters." As they walked away in different directions, Daniel finally understood the lesson Victoria had been trying to teach him all along. A person's value does not come from the money they have, the title they hold, or the approval they receive from others. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who quietly carry the most strength. Victoria Hayes did not win because she owned $1 billion company. She won because she never allowed someone else to decide her worth. And Daniel Whitaker did not lose because he lost control of an empire. He lost because he forgot to appreciate the person who stood beside him before the world knew his name. In the end, the greatest power was not wealth, status, or influence. It was knowing your own value and never allowing anyone to make you forget it.